Yeah, but he's doing his job because that's his job. He's crowdfunded by us, and yesterday backfired on the police because his crowdfunding has gone up to six figures because he's got so much love and support, and he's the second greatest anti-Brexit man apart from you.
how to win over the audience in one fell swoop. Do you know, I'm such a boastful little kid that it makes me uncomfortable when other people do it. I do it. I like to think I'm doing it tongue in cheek, but now you've made me all blushy and embarrassed. So what does it? I mean, I don't think it matters. I was going to say, what does it hope to achieve? But that doesn't matter, does it? It's the simple right of him to be there. What about the argument that no one is preventing him from making his case or having his freedom of expression? They're simply controlling the volume at which he can do it. Well,
that's a good point, and let's stress that. He's been there roughly about 5 or 6 years, and he's had odd instances with the police, and to be fair, it's settled down. They moved him away from directly outside the carriage gates because the noise could be heard in the chamber, apparently. Yeah. So fair enough, we accepted that, moved away, so they can't hear, the MPs can't hear. We're literally in the middle of a traffic island. If you go down, you'll see.
Yes, of course.
And we're not really disturbing anybody as they pass by. That's just a bit of a red herring they're using to shut down free speech. And as I think it was Gareth said yesterday on the radio, and Steve, protests should be seen and heard. Yeah. It's no good just standing there with your arms closed.
Well, Gandhi would disagree.
Well, to a point, I think if we just stood in silence, and maybe that's something we should do. I was tempted to go next week when I go down with just a sign, a banner with nothing on, because if you remember what happened in Russia at the start of the war in Ukraine, there was a lady I remember seeing with just a banner, an old lady, and she had nothing written on it, and she was dragged away. Yeah, so that's a powerful protest as well. Point taken. But I think Steve is just trying to say this legislation it's even been called the Steve Bray clause.
Well, again, the Met insist it wasn't this new power. I mean, the powers came in yesterday, and Steve got his collar felt, while the Met insists that it had nothing to do with the new powers that came in yesterday. Well, also on the same day that they went into special measures for being an absolute clown car of a police service. So it's all a bit of a mess, isn't it? And it seems an odd. I suppose one lesson we can all learn from this, Trevor.
Yeah.
If you are a victim of crime in London at the moment and you are very keen to see police turn up mob-handed, just start shouting "Stop Brexit" at the top of your voice, and there'll be 20 of them there in 10 seconds flat.
Yeah, there's a wicked irony there, isn't there?
There certainly is. 11:37 is the time. Apologies to whoever I nicked that joke from on Twitter last night. Also passed it off as my own at the O2 Indigo, where, funnily enough, Alanis Morissette was playing, and Trevor just talked about a wicked irony. It's almost like we script this stuff. Saul's in Hackney. Saul, what's going on?
Hi, James.
Hello, Saul.
I've been waiting for absolute weeks to make this call.
Oh,
right.
I didn't know the topic. Are you psychic? Are you clairvoyant? Did you know that Steve Bray was going to be in the news today?
No, I'm just desperate to talk to you.
Oh, okay. Well, that's perfectly understandable.
No, this can apply to anything we've spoken about in the last few weeks, because this isn't about Steve Bray. It's about the way that the whole country really operates. So this isn't a call that I'll be able to proudly play out to my family for reasons that will become obvious. It's Daily Mail and the right-wing press do. I've got older relatives who are unsurprisingly Daily Mail readers, bit of the Telegraph, those kind of newspapers. And they come out with the ultimate hypocrisy at the family dinners. We were talking about Corbyn, and I'm not a great defender of Corbyn. We don't need to go down that route for obvious reasons. But it came out, I was talking about the policies, really, and I was saying, why wouldn't you vote for the Labour manifesto from 2017 or 19, just based on purely what was in it, not the leader? And they were saying, because that leads to socialism. And I said, what's so bad about that? And their answer, the only answer they could give, was socialism leads to tyranny. We've seen it in Russia.
Right.
And it's just sad, a blinding hypocrisy.
But what's this got to? I appreciate you've got a week's worth of contributions and contemplations backed up. But what's that got to do with Steve Bray? You mean that people will take against him because they've been told to, without really thinking about it very much themselves?
No, not quite. I mean the criminalisation of protest democracy, and that's what we're seeing right now with this Johnson government. We're seeing them take away the key pillar of democracy that is protest. There's a video on Steve Bray's YouTube channel, Twitter feed, of him having a chat with a police officer, and the police officer's response to him having a go is, well, just vote for a different government. And that's such a key misunderstanding of what our democracy is.
Of course
People
it is.
think
And indeed what freedom of expression is as well. It's as if you can only exercise it once every 4 or 5 years.
People think it's just who you vote for in an election, when partially because of PR and first past post. But also, we need to have a functioning right to protest. Because if they can get away with it with Steve Bray, what about if we had a noisy BLM protest outside Parliament?
Well, it is designed, I mean, the new laws, and there's a discussion to be had, isn't there, about whether we believe the Metropolitan Police when they say that this action yesterday wasn't linked to the new laws, where non-violent protests that have a significant disruptive effect. And that's an arbitrary phrase that will be decided upon by police who are presumably in contact with politicians, and that is pretty scary. Sometimes slippery slope arguments don't always work, but on this occasion it does seem to be pertinent. 20 minutes to 12. Saul, actually, seeing as you've been waiting so long to come on, I shall enjoy your company for a little bit longer. What about the simple argument that they're not silencing him, they're merely controlling the volume?
I simply think that's not true. We see the way that the police treat protest. And let's just assume they're telling the truth with what you just said. Let's assume that this isn't the new laws. Everyone agrees that the new laws are more restrictive, I think.
Well, that's what they're for.
Yeah, exactly. If this isn't the new laws, what are the new laws going to actually be?
They're going to stop people from gluing themselves to roads or well, I don't know. There's already laws to stop people gluing. Well, I think the phrase that the new laws exist for is significant disruptive effect, because what they're essentially doing is bringing in laws that say if your protest is working, we're going to have new powers to smash it up, to break it up. So everyone protests in ways that, I mean, what would happen to the suffragettes, for God's sake?
Don't they redefine the definition of protest to include single-person protest, i.e. Steve Bray? Yeah,
and I mean, there's two words hanging over this conversation that we should perhaps have mentioned sooner. I sense you might be too young to appreciate their resonance, but the last fella whose protest outside Parliament saw politicians trying to change the law was Brian Hoare, of course.
Who's he?
He's an anti-war protester who set up camp outside Parliament and lived there, stayed there for years before very sadly dying of lung cancer. And Brian Hoare was protesting against the he began the Parliament Square peace campaign before the 2001 United States attacks, post 9/11 attacks, and history has judged Brian Hoare very kindly. And yet politicians on this occasion, of course, from a Labour government, were very keen to pass laws that moved him along from his camp, his impromptu camp outside Parliament. And speaking of slippery slopes, Saul, thank you. I hope it was worth the wait. The previous caller referenced Sam Coates, who works for Sky News, and I mean, did so perhaps from a slightly combative point of view, saying, well, he's not. But actually, I think there's quite a powerful argument here that is more along the lines of, well, if it's Steve Bray today, who will it be tomorrow, if you see what I mean? Because in fact, Tim Walker makes this point, who's a former Daily Telegraph journalist who has subsequently seen the light in the most spectacular of fashions. How long before the Met Police take the view that what Sam Coates is doing isn't so very different from what Steve Bray is doing? So have a listen to this.
Did you lie at the dispatch box, Prime Minister? Why did you try and stop Sue Gray publishing her report, Prime Minister? Do you endorse law-breaking in Cabinet, Priti Patel? Foreign Secretary. Is Partygate embarrassing on the world stage, Foreign Secretary? Are you being loyal to save your job? Do you think a future Prime Minister would make you Foreign Secretary? Do you want to replace Boris Johnson? Would you defend anything at all, Grant Shapps? Simon Clarke, why did you get the facts wrong yesterday over the Sue Gray report meeting? Are you embarrassed by getting the facts wrong? Does Partygate enhance this government's reputation, Suella? Good morning to you. Did you discuss Partygate in Cabinet, Deputy Prime Minister? Has Boris Johnson got a better grip on government than you had on the Foreign Office last year? Did Boris Johnson lie at the dispatch box, Nadim Zahawi? Or would you prefer to succeed him as Prime Minister? Did you talk about Partygate in Cabinet, or is it easier to hear no evil and see no evil?
Matters to discuss.
I bet there are.
11:45. I mean, is there a massive difference there? I think, I don't know if you'll thank me for pointing this out, but if you want access to the people who are currently running the country and you want them to come onto your programme, Sam Coates giving you a fairly robust list there of questions you must never ask them if you want them to come back. If you rely upon access to people in power, then speaking truth to power has become increasingly verboten in this country. And if that applies to household name journalists, crikey, it's hardly surprising to see Steve Bray having his speakers nicked. 12 minutes to 12 is the time. I would remind you also that the Times recently pulled a story about Boris Johnson's current wife's job search, reportedly at the request of Downing Street, and the story has not been disproved or denied. And the former editor of the Daily Mail, the man who brought you those profoundly fascistic front pages, Crush the Saboteurs, Enemies of the People. I mean, that one is straight out of the playbook, isn't it? I'll remain a university. So Paul Dacre launching attacks there upon parliamentary sovereignty, upon the independence of the judiciary. The enemies of the people were judges, attacking judges. And can you think of any times in history when judges have been lined up for enemies of the people type treatment? And then, of course, academic freedom. I'll remain a universities, because the more educated and informed you were, the more likely you were to be opposed to the Brexit that the Daily Mail championed. He's apparently getting a seat in the House of Lords. So you can attack judges on the front page of the best-selling newspaper in the country and get a seat in the House of Lords in Boris Johnson's Brexit Britain. But if you shout "Stop Brexit" while Marc Francois is being interviewed on the telly, you get your equipment nicked. Ah, come on. And then the Times story. Don't like that story. Please remove it. A bloke called Tony Gallagher, I'm told, was editing the Times that day. Used to edit the Sun. It's kind of got a little, like a Cafe Nero loyalty card with Rupert Murdoch stamps on it. Used to be at the Telegraph as well at one point. So it's like they're sort of touring them. Oh, quick call from Downing Street. Story gets yanked. Story gets pulled. So Downing Street exercised that sort of power over newspapers. Steve Bray's role suddenly, although often some of what he does might be annoying or irritating, but if you think that newspaper editors are kowtowing to demands from Downing Street, maybe Steve Bray's role in our democracy is actually a hell of a lot more valuable than any of us realised. And then you've got Andrea Leadsom accusing him of violent protests. So, I'll play it one more time or not? Do you want to? Let's hear what David in Lewis has to say first. David, before David speaks, I've got no support yet for the government, which I would quite like to hear. I'd like to hear an intelligent argument. Possibly the fact that Andrea Leadsom had to lie about him being violent is proof that there aren't any intelligent arguments to be made. But if there are valid arguments, and look, I'll play it again because I want someone to explain to me why this shouldn't be allowed. And cogent, considered, and honest arguments. Why shouldn't this be allowed?
Well, we've got a minority government, and
Stop
what we've
Brexit.
seen...
It's a disaster.
What we've seen... do you know, you're a disgrace. Please leave. Please leave. Let this debate take place. Let this debate take place. This is just... And this is an example of the extremism that we see from Remainers.
Are you party to any information that we haven't heard so far?
Not really. We had talks...
Brexit!
If we leave, it will be delightful that this idiot will shut up.
He's exercising his democratic right. I appreciate it makes it very difficult to do an interview, and we do want to hear
We'll have a go.
as well. We will try.
Article 50!
We'll have a go.
Finally, and most of all, I want to thank my husband, Philip, who's been my greatest supporter and my closest companion.
That wasn't me.
I think the answer to that is I think not.
Their questions that Sue Gray needs to ask Mr Cummings.
Where has it gone?
OK, so the number of MPs that have gone public, though, alongside you is still in single figures. I understand you've got a bit of a distraction down there on College Green, but I understand that it's still in single figures, nowhere near 54.
It's the village idiot. The village idiot is out.
The village idiot is in front of the camera.
I think a lot of colleagues are waiting for Sue Gray's report. The problem is that her workload is mounting up. I'm not sure she hasn't got more work to do than she started with.
Well, I must apologise for the language displayed in the poster behind you there, but let me just ask you one more point. You're not tempted by any of these morsels of red meat being thrown by the Prime Minister in your direction?
No, I find it a little bit patronising that it's a bit like offering sweets to placate children that you've already had in your pocket and you've already promised them. Most of this was in our manifesto.
It rather depends on the deal. We're not... If we do leave, by the way, it'll be a delight to go and engage with these people and tell them they've lost.
Is that a baritone? Would you call that a baritone at the end there? I think it was a baritone, wasn't it? A rather rich baritone. David is in Lewis. David, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello. James. Sorry, I can't really give you any. Can't really. Thanks to you, I can't really say anything good about this government. So no. I'm afraid I'm.
It's not thanks to me. It's thanks to them. I'm merely the lens through which you have viewed them, or don't shoot the messenger, or indeed praise him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to share with you. I used to be a professional musician living in London, and my son, who's pretty politically engaged, and the whole family's not violently anti-Brexit. So he said to me one time, he said, "You know all these musicians. Why don't you make some kind of, event, some kind of protesting?" And I thought, no, I can't do that. But in the end, I thought about it, and what with social media and everything, I just put the word around. And I have to tell you that for what it's worth, I think there's probably in the thousands and thousands of professional musicians working in London or almost anywhere in the UK, there are probably a handful who would have ever supported Brexit.
Yes, of course.
So anyway, I put together October 2019 on Parliament Green. I managed to assemble a group of about 50 brass and percussion players.
I missed that. Well, I should have had you on.
Just to play.
Lovely.
Yeah, I'm sorry you couldn't have been there, but anyway, it was an amazing event. We got a very eminent conductor to perform to conduct us because you needed it with that number of people, and we played for about an hour early evening. Actually, Extinction Rebellion had closed off most of the roads around there, so the police were a little bit stretched.
Sure.
But I did have a chat with an officer. And I have to say, he and his colleagues were absolutely brilliant because they understood that it was perfectly peaceful. We weren't going to, threaten anyone. We were just.
But you were noisy.
Point.
You were loud.
We were, yeah.
That wouldn't be allowed now.
Our performance of the Handel's Royal Fireworks music by a German composer who lived in London,
of course,
was pretty loud, and we played the Ode to Joy, and we played Paris, Jerusalem, and a load of fantastic music. They were great performers, and it was. There is a video somewhere on Facebook.
That is what is under threat. So Steve Bray begins to look like a canary down the coal mine. Would you do that now?
Well, the thing is, this is the thing, James. I was going to go on to say. I think if I rang round all those 50 performers now and said, "Could you come and do this?" I don't think they'd want to do it because I think they'd all be risk arrest, wouldn't they, if we were making that much noise?
I think they would,
was an incredible performance.
And again, you give us a sort of technological nuance on it as well, because what is louder technically? I don't know. An amplified voice or an unmuted trombone. You can get a right old, or indeed 50 unmuted trombones. You're going to make a hell of a lot more noise than one bloke with a loudspeaker. I think sometimes I dismiss slippery slope arguments for being a bit too simplistic, but that's stupid because sometimes they are just true. Clichés don't become clichés because they're not accurate reflections of reality. They become clichés because they're incredibly commonplace reflections of reality. So slippery slope explanations have a role to play. Theo Ushwood has joined us. Do you want me to ask you about this, or would you rather I didn't?
The protests?
Yeah, but Steve Bray having his speakers nicked, because Ben's gone in on...
I saw that Ben had an opinion about it. Which is allowed to have an opinion.
You're allergic to opinions, of course. I just wondered. That's why I said I won't ask you about it. There's no pressure. I'm not playing any games.
It's just. I just remember back from 2016, and around 2016, the Brexit referendum and everything subsequently came afterwards. It was just difficult to do. It was difficult to do the job, but at the same time, I think it's important that what sort of captured the zeitgeist of Brexit was that people were really engaged with politics, and they wanted to have an opinion, and they wanted to shout about it, and they wanted to get their voices heard. And I think that there's a loss somewhere in there if people can't do that. Nicely put.
It's Raab versus Rayner today.
I know, it's the Deputies edition because of course the Prime Minister is at the NATO summit in Madrid. It's going to be much more political. Because, of course, they're not trying to win over a particular caucus of voters. They're going after. Raab will go towards the Tory ideology and mantras. Angela Rayner, I think, will go, of course, go back into her comfort zone would be unfair, but go towards what Labour are particularly interested in. I expect they'll still focus. Angela Rayner will still focus her 6 questions on the economy, but she'll be less shy than Keir Starmer, I think, when it comes to making, and this is just going on previous Deputies editions, when it comes to making much more political, pointed arguments in the House of Commons.
She's a more confrontational Commons performer than Keir Starmer, for good or for ill. So there should perhaps be a little bit more...
there'll be more spike.
And spark.
And spark. Undoubtedly there'll be more. There'll be both, and there'll be more cheering, I'd have thought, from the Labour MPs behind her, who are usually more impressed by what she has to offer at the dispatch box than by what Keir Starmer has, particularly in the last couple of weeks, has managed against Boris Johnson. So, but having said that, there is an opportunity there for. There's an opportunity there for Dominic Raab to. I think he's going to bring up Conservative talking points, particularly about the strikes. Keir Starmer said this morning, he's confirmed this morning, I should say, that Labour front benchers who attended the picket lines won't face any sanction from the Conservative Party, from the Labour Party whips, I should say. So they've been given a pass. Of course, you had Kate Osborne on your programme, who was one of those who went out and joined the RMT. So I expect that will... Dominic Raab is much more likely to bring that up at PMQs, I'd have thought, today. As well.
I mean, has it always been like that? The Prime Minister comes back because he's supposed to, or she's supposed to just be answering questions. And Johnson has made it a bit of a habit to try and turn the tables on the...
And has been reprimanded by the Speaker for it, because, of course, it's Prime Minister.
That lot of good that does. But has that always been the case? Was it like... I don't remember it being like that under Theresa May. I can't... David Cameron, would he come... I mean, you might have the odd
He
point.
would make jokes.
Yeah, but Johnson tries to turn the whole episode into opposition leaders' question.
Yeah.
It's not very pretty to see. 12 noon is the time, as ever on Thursdays at this point. Wednesdays
sorry,
at this point. No, correct. Absolutely. I can't say sorry for that, can you? It is indeed Wednesday. As ever on Wednesdays at this point, we're watching the screen in preparation for the Labour Party, in this case Deputy Leader, to get to her feet and begin PMQs proper, which we will take in its entirety. You're being very modest. You had a big scoop yesterday.
I did. I got lucky.
Didn't get lucky.
Fortunate.
Honestly, if you don't sell yourself,
well, there's a statement. There's a statement on that at about 1:30 today with Kit Malthouse, the policing minister in the Home Office, answering questions about it and the decision to put the Met Police into special measures.
Theo Ashwood with an exclusive on that story yesterday afternoon, which I believe you broke on Sheila Fogarty's show.
I did. Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Sorry. It's one of those ones where you look at it, you think, I could have hold on to it for James O'Brien or Nick Ferrari, whoever, and you just like, I can't, sorry.
No, you've got to go straight to the presses. Publish and be damned. And that statement coming up at 1:30 today. So, I mean, all 6 questions on economic performance. Did you think that Dominic Raab might refer to Sadiq Khan's single market support
I think,
night?
of course, sorry, James, I should have returned the compliment. Your big scoop, which actually I think is much more significant than...
It's nothing to do with me. I mean, literally, I was just on the same stage.
You pressed him on the question. He could have wriggled out of that one.
I don't think he wanted to.
But it's a really... I think it will come up.
Oh, we're going now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I also share with the Deputy Prime Minister his deepest condolences and his personal experience as we mourn the loss of Dame Deborah James, who fearlessly campaigned to inspire so many, and I'm absolutely sure there's no doubt that she saved the lives of many more. And to the family of Zara Alina, who was tragically murdered this week on the streets of Ilford. Well, Mr. Speaker, I also want to congratulate the two honourable members, the new members, who won in the by-elections this week, including my honourable friend, the member for Wakefield. Mr. Speaker, this week the government lost 2 by-elections in one day, the first in 3 decades. It's no wonder that the Prime Minister has fled the country and left the honourable member to carry the can. The people of Wakefield and Tiverton held their own vote of no confidence. The Prime Minister isn't just losing the room, Mr. Speaker, he's losing the country. But instead of showing some humility, he intends to limp on until the 2030s. So does he think the Cabinet will prop him up for this long?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady. I gently point out to her that we want this Prime Minister to go on a lot longer than she wants the leader of the Labour Party to go on. Mr. Speaker, we've got a working majority of 75. We're focusing on delivering for the British people. Record low unemployment wouldn't have happened if we'd listened to the Labour Party. More policing, tougher sentencing in force this week. Police, Courts, Crime and Sentencing Act. She voted against both, so did the Labour Party. And we'll protect the public from these damaging rail strikes when we've got the scene of Labour front benchers joining the picket lines.
Speaker, here we go again. But the truth is, what I want for my honourable friend, the Leader of this opposition, is not to be the Leader of the opposition, but to be the Prime Minister of this country. And to be honest, Mr. Speaker, it couldn't come quick enough. Britain can't stomach this Prime Minister for another 8 years. His own backbenchers can't stomach him for another 8 minutes. And if they continue to prop him up, Mr. Speaker, I doubt the voters will stomach him for even 8 seconds in the ballot box. Now let's imagine, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is still clinging on into the 2030s. Under this tax-high, low-growth Tory government, at this rate, by 2030, the British public will have endured 55 tax rises. So how many more tax rises will this government inflict on working families before he says enough is enough?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think she was right first time. Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what we're doing. Near record levels of youth unemployment, 3.8% unemployment. We're cutting taxes next month on national insurance, £330 million. We're delivering for families through the difficult times of the cost of living. What about the Labour Party? We heard yesterday what their plan is. Their plan is no plan. The leader of the Labour Party said he's wiping the slate clean. He's starting from scratch. He's only been in the job 2 years. So Tony Blair, who's actually got some experience of winning elections, says there's a gaping hole in Labour's policy offer, and all the while there's a smile creeping over her face. All the while she's revelling in it. We're getting on with serving the people of this country. She's just playing political games.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd revel in the opportunity for the people of this country to have more than just by-elections to see what they think of this government opposite. Call a general election and see where the people are, Mr. Speaker. And this is a man who once said high levels of government taxation was hurting UK competitiveness. Now he's backing the Prime Minister who wants to put taxes up 15 times. At this rate, Mr. Speaker, working people will be paying £500 billion more in tax by 2030. How high does he think the burden on working people should get before he says enough is enough?
Deputy Prime Minister.
We're the ones helping working people with a tax cut. with a tax cut of £330, with the support for those on the lowest incomes, with the £650 support for 8 million on the lowest incomes, and with, frankly, the record level of investment coming into this country, from the £1 billion by Moderna for vaccines to the highest level tech investment in Europe, according to Atomico. We are the ones with a plan for low unemployment, a high wage, a high skill economy. At Labour, it's back to year zero.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, he pretends to emphasise with those struggling with the Tory cost of living crisis when it was he himself who once said that food bank users are not in poverty but simply have a cash flow problem. The honourable member doesn't. He spent over £1 million in 9 months on private jets. It shows how out of touch this government is, Mr. Speaker. But at this rate, by 2030, 1 million more people will be using food banks. How many more working people will be pushed into poverty by his Prime Minister before he says enough is enough?
I tell you, if the Labour Party, if the Right Honourable Lady wants to help working people, they should be clear in standing up against these militant, reckless strikes by RMT. The Right Honourable Lady has flip-flopped. The Right Honourable Lady has flip-flopped all over the place when it came to these strikes. First she said they were lose-lose. Then she tweeted workers were left with no choice. When she was asked by the BBC, straight question, she's normally a straight-shooting politician, do you like the RMT? She said, I'm going to have to go now. I've got a train to catch. She talks about working people. She talks about working people. Where was the Right Honourable Lady when the comrades were on the picket line last Thursday? Where was she when the Labour front bench were joining them rather than standing up for the public? She was at the Glyndebourne Music Festival, sipping champagne, listening to opera. Champagne socialism is back in the Labour Party.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that says a lot about the party opposite. I'll tell them a few things about militancy. It's this government that are acting in a militant way. And while they should have been at the negotiating table, they were at the banqueting table getting hundreds of thousands squeezed out of their donors instead of dealing with a crisis. And he talks about trains. No one can get trains because of his failed transport minister, Mr. Speaker. And I tell you, he has a stronger stomach than his...
I think we'll just have a little quiet. I want to hear the question, and you'll also want to hear the answer. Angela Rayner.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it's rather ironic that you have to intervene because of the baying mob here when they've got people through their noisy protest laws being stopped for protesting out on the street. The thing is, Mr. Speaker, they don't like it when the public say what they think of them. But I tell you, the honourable gentleman opposite has a stronger stomach than his colleagues behind him.
Honestly, I want to hear the question, I want to hear the answer. And I hate to say it, so do your constituents. Think about them for once instead of yourselves. Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And when they were asked about the absent Prime Minister's plans to stick around until 2030, one honourable member opposite said he'd lost the plot. Another one said anyone with half a brain would realise how dire things are. Yeah. And a former Conservative leader said that the country would be better off under new leadership. Yeah. And now the Prime Minister is at war with his own Defence Secretary after confirming he will break his manifesto pledge and increasing defence spending. Under this government, Britain is set to have less troops, less planes and less ships. The only thing the Prime Minister's interested in is defending his own job. Just how many more troops have to lose their jobs before he finally says enough is enough?
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, there's a £24 billion increase for armed forces. Spending on the armed forces is rising to 2.3% of GDP, again making us the largest military spender in Europe. And frankly, we'll take no lessons from the Right Honourable Lady when it comes to security in this country. First thing she did when she became an MP, 2016, voted against Trident, leaving us exposed. And she was campaigning for the Right Honourable Member for Islington North to be Prime Minister, someone who would take us out of NATO.
Mr. Speaker, talking about NATO, where was the Honourable Member when the situation in Afghanistan on a sun lounger? That's where the Honourable Member was. I take no lectures from the Honourable Member when it comes to doing your job. The Prime Minister said he felt no shame over the by-election defeats. He said his government have been quite exceptional. Well, I agree that they've been exceptional, all right. An exceptional record on stagnant wages, rising poverty and broken promises. And the Prime Minister wants to drag this out until 2030. And how much more can he stomach before he finds the guts, Mr. Speaker? How many more tax rises? How many more families drove into poverty? And how many manifesto pledges broken? I hope for the sake of the British public, Mr. Speaker, that we never find out. And when will the Deputy Prime Minister finally grow a backbone and tell the Prime Minister the game is up?
Mr. Speaker, I can't help thinking that Right Honourable Lady is auditioning for the leadership contest on that side, not really referring to anything on this side. She's got the support of the Honourable Member. Look, I'll tell you what we're doing. We're putting in place the policies to grow our economy, to help...
Mr Murray, we've had a good questions already for Scotland. It's not continued. It's not your debate. Come on.
Mr. Speaker, he was just announcing his support for the Right Honourable Lady in the forthcoming... We're putting in places the economic plan to help people with the cost of living. The Labour leader is getting ready for year zero. We're the ones supporting Ukraine with sanctions on Russia, with military support. The Honourable Lady voted to abolish Trident. We're the ones making the streets safer, more police and tougher sentencing under the Police Crime Sentencing Act in force this week. She voted against both. They got no plan. They're not fit to govern, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Eden Project North has been 5 years of my parliamentary life. We've gone through 3 Prime Ministers, 4 Chancellors, a plethora of ministers, but no, what we've got to the point is that the levelling up bid is going to go in very shortly. We've got a shovel-ready plan, we've got full planning permission. Does my right honourable friend agree with me? It is money worth spending in Morecambe.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend, there is no greater and more tenacious campaigner than the honourable member for his constituents. He'll know, I can't discuss the details of any specific bids, but the next round of funding allocations will be announced in the autumn, so we won't have to wait too much longer.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with the remarks of the Deputy Prime Minister and the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party at the sad death of Dame Deborah James. Our thoughts and prayers are with her family at this trying time, and we thank her for all that she has done to raise money for anti-cancer. Mr. Speaker, Scotland's First Minister has set the date and started the campaign. Our nation will have its independence referendum on the 19th of October 2023. The reality is Scotland has already paid the price for not being independent. Westminster governments we did not vote for, imposing policies we don't support. Breaking international law, dragging Scotland through a damaging Brexit we didn't vote for, and delivering deep austerity cuts. Contrast that with our European neighbours, who have greater income equality, lower poverty rates and higher productivity. Mr. Speaker, why not Scotland? In the weeks and months ahead, we will make the positive case for independence. Will the opposition, if they can, make the case for continued Westminster rule?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman? It's always good to see him in his place. No, genuinely, it's good to see him in his place. It's not the right time for another referendum, given the challenges that we face as one united kingdom. And I think, and he referred to some of the challenges in Scotland, but I think actually the people of Scotland want their two governments to work together, and we are keen, willing, enthusiastic to do so.
Ian Blackfoot.
There is no case for the union, as we've just heard from the Deputy Prime Minister, because, Mr Speaker, the harsh reality is that the Tories might fear democratic debate, but they don't have the right to block Scottish democracy. As the late Canon Kenyon Wright said, what if the other voice we all know so well responds by saying, "We say no, we are the state"? His answer, well, we say yes, and we are the people. Just last year, the member for Murray, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives no less, put it in his own words: a vote for the Scottish National Party is another vote for an independence referendum. Well, you won't often hear me say this, but I agree with him, and so do the Scottish people. Scottish democracy will not be a prisoner of any Prime Minister in this place. So why is the UK government scared of democracy? Or is it simply that they have run out of ideas to defend the failing Westminster system?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank the honourable gentleman. I think he's rather airbrushing history with that long soliloquy. But look, he mentioned the problems that Scotland faces. Huge tax burden imposed by the SNP. The Scotland's record on science and maths under the international PISA rankings are now have dropped below England and Wales, and the SNP have presided over the worst drug death rate in Europe, the highest since records began. I think the people of Scotland expect their government in Holyrood and in Westminster to work together to tackle the issues facing them in their day-to-day lives. That's what we're doing.
Peter Alders.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. There are great opportunities. Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my sincere apologies. There are, Mr Speaker, great opportunities to create exciting new jobs in low-carbon energy along the East Anglian coast, and East Coast College are up for the challenge of providing local people with the necessary skills. However, they and other colleges are finding it increasingly difficult.
And as is our custom, we withdraw from the fray after the main event comes to a conclusion. And we'll catch up with Theo Osherwood about this week's PMQs. Maybe even, I might even invite your opinions on it as well, if I'm feeling generous. Find out after this. 22 minutes after 12, you're listening to James O'Brien and Theo Osherwood on LBC, the gruesome twosome. Speaking of gruesome twosomes, here's a text. This is the worst PMQs I have ever listened to. It's pathetic. Angela Rayner's performance was pitiful. Rob, not great, but she could have done much better than that, given the dreadful situation we're in. I mean, listen, Theo, the bar is not high, but I think that's the most impressive I've ever seen Dominic Raab.
He had the best one-liners, and he started off by, of course, when Angela Rayner said the Prime Minister had fled the country after those two by-election results, and why isn't it that the Cabinet will not get rid of Boris Johnson now? Raab snapped back that at least he wants the Prime Minister to remain in post up until the 2030s, which is longer than Angela Rayner is happy for Keir Starmer to be the leader of the Labour Party. And, of course, Raab is trying to take advantage of the dissatisfaction on the Labour benches with Keir Starmer, the looming, it's going to be an announcement from Durham Police about whether Keir Starmer broke rules and will be subsequently given a fixed penalty notice, which would spell the end of his career as the leader of the opposition. What Raab was trying to do was to try and sow or add to the discontent on the Labour benches. It was interesting, I thought, that Angela Rayner, very pointed in the fact she was saying about, with the Prime Minister away, it's up to the Cabinet to try and get rid of Boris Johnson. We know that there are potentially going to be some rule changes with these elections to the 1922 committee next week, the week after. But there's a feeling that actually if Boris Johnson is to go, it will be because members of his Cabinet have gone up to him and said you can no longer remain in post. That echoed what Pauline Latham, a Derbyshire MP, was saying at the beginning of the week, saying actually MPs, backbench MPs, can't do anything for the moment. It's down to the Cabinet. Dominic Raab also brought up Angela Rayner went to Glyndebourne, which I've never been to Glyndebourne. I think it's opera. It's very it's a fairly expensive venue to go to see opera. Angela Rayner was seen drinking champagne there. And I always think those, I mean, it's just a personal, and I will express an opinion there. I always think these things are slightly unfair.
Well, it's epic snobbery.
That you can't go to the opera. I always think these, but it worked for, there's
an awful lot of people on the Tory benches who genuinely think that Angela Rayner has no business going to the opera because she grew up on a council estate. And that's who Dominic Raab was appealing to. I'm allowed to have opinions.
Right. And of course,
that's because they're crashing snobs, and also, well, I'm perhaps not allowed that opinion.
So what Dominic Raab was trying to do, and he was juxtaposing it against Angela Rayner saying, well, I stick up for the working man and women and the strikers on the RMT picket line, was trying to draw a dividing line between Angela Rayner appearing at Glyndebourne and then actually not turning up to those picket lines, of course, at the behest of Keir Starmer.
Yes, so it's the idea that you can't enjoy the opera but also support industrial action because the opera is not for the plebs.
Yes, so then Angela Rayner brought up the issue of defence, which was an interesting one because, of course, I thought it was interesting. The reason I pick it out was because actually that was much more in keeping with something that Keir Starmer might do, putting forward the idea that Labour is strong on defence, strong on Queen and country, and of course Dominic Raab then said, well, you supported Jeremy Corbyn who wanted to get rid of our nuclear deterrent, the Trident nuclear deterrent. And that was actually the highlight, I thought, of Angela Rayner's comebacks, was saying, well, actually, when you were Foreign Secretary, you were on a sun lounger during the last summer during the Afghanistan crisis when we were desperately trying to get people out of the country who had supported Allied forces, Afghans who'd supported Allied forces and now risked, and of course many we've heard about, have been at risk of being executed by the Taliban because they supported our not just our forces, our troops, but also civilian staff working in the country when the Allies were there taking over, running the country from the Taliban instead of the Taliban. And of course, Dominic Raab didn't exactly rush back to try and take command of the situation as it developed last summer. I thought that was actually probably that was the best line that Angela Rayner had. I thought also, just picking up and just to reflect this, what Ian Blackford's saying, given it was an important appearance for Ian Blackford, the first time that he'd been in the House of Commons since the announcement, of course, yesterday from Nicola Sturgeon that there'd be this consultative referendum. The Prime Minister's line, and I would expect to hear this from the Prime Minister as well, now is not the time for a second independence referendum. Dominic Raab saying it was time for the people of Scotland, he was saying the people of Scotland want their two governments to work together. So this is firmly, for the time being at least, going to remain a consultative referendum with no legal basis as far as Westminster government is concerned, although, of course, if the result were to come in for independence, it would have Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP would argue, and I'm sure Ian Blackford would argue, and undermining, it would be untenable for the government to keep Scotland as part of the United Kingdom.
So watch this space.
Mm-hmm.
You were wrong about the economy. She went in on a few other things as well, but
but she also went in. She talked a lot about tax.
She did,
and all of the tax rises under this government.
That'll play well, oddly, with conservative backbenchers,
exactly,
won't it? With the libertarian wing.
Yeah, but it also play well with many working people who are seeing their national insurance.
I mean, how does that work? Because you know the old line about the party told you to ignore the evidence of your eyes and ears. As people see their taxes going up, and conservative politicians keep insisting that they're bringing taxes down, you'd imagine there'd be some sort of breaking point, or at least some sort of tension. But that seems to be the direction of traffic at the moment. We are the party of cutting taxes. Raab saying we're cutting a tax now, and they get there at the highest they've been in 70 years.
And there's a real frustration amongst the libertarian wing, and discontent that the government will not cut taxes faster because they see that the whole ideology, conservative ideology, is that you cut taxes. This is quote unquote trickle down economics. Don't shoot me. But the whole ideology is that you cut taxes, therefore you spur growth, you spur entrepreneurialism, you spur risk taking, and you grow the economy, which means that overall you end up with more significant tax receipts. I was speaking to a Tory donor.
Because the less a poor person earns, the harder they work, and the more a rich person earns, the harder they work. That's the philosophy that underpins trickle-down economics.
So I was speaking to a Tory donor about this just privately, and they were saying they were saying to me, look, if we can cut, if we cut taxes, then I can invest more, I can create more jobs. And therefore, this economy.
Then they say this with
grow.
A straight face. So this is someone with millions of pounds in the bank.
Maybe even more than that.
Yeah, but I'm not going to invest it at the moment because I have to pay too much of it in tax.
Too much tax.
Yeah, but I've got billions of pounds, millions and millions and millions of pounds.
And I want to invest in this country, but I can't invest in this country.
But I could. So if I invest money, I'm doing it to make more money. But I'm not going to invest money to make more money because I have to pay tax on the more money that I make. So
yes, because corporation tax is on profit.
So here's a tenner. You can only keep £6.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to bother? No, in that case, I don't want the £6.
So
no, I understand it. I just find these people ridiculous. It's 12:30. I've got Simon Marks up next because there have been interesting events in America, and I may get you back after that.
Yeah,
the 45 to go through. Keir Starmer has responded to Sadiq Khan's comments about the single market, and it's not pretty.
No, it's not. It's and just to underscore, and this is the reason I think it was a great scoop on your part, James. Keir Starmer and Sadiq Khan are unbelielievably close.
Yeah.
In political.
You won't thank him for this, will he?
They're both.
Well, let's not spoil it. It's not. We'll go with that probably after the 45. The time now is 12:30. Amelia Cox is here now with your headline. 32 minutes after 12 is the time. It's odd, isn't it? But I suppose inevitable that the coverage of American politics in British media, and on this programme in particular, has diminished enormously since Joe Biden became president of the United States of America and Donald Trump ceased to be so, although, of course, not according to his fevered imagination. And I mean, it's inevitable. Trump was very good for business for the media because everything he did was so ridiculous and or depraved. But, of course, the full reckoning is not yet in. And the hearings into what happened on January the 6th are entrancing much of America, not Fox News viewers, who are, Rupert Murdoch doesn't think that they should be shown much of the evidence that is unfolding at the January the 6th. But I thought we would get Simon Marks to make sure that you were up to speed with everything that's going on. And it is quite a circus, Simon.
It is a circus, and I must tell you, James, that Fox News actually did cover yesterday's hearing and told their viewers that the evidence that had been presented at it was devastating for former President Donald Trump. And there's no question that that is the case. I mean, there were some extraordinary revelations contained in the witness testimony provided by Cassidy Hutchinson, this now 26-year-old former top aide to then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, whose literal proximity to events in those last few weeks of the Trump West Wing was such that she could walk from the office where she and Mark Meadows worked to the Oval Office down the corridor in what she estimated was 5 seconds. So she's absolutely a witness to events that took place inside that White House in the run-up to January the 6th and the aftermath of the insurrection by Donald Trump's mob on Capitol Hill. But, and it is an important caveat, I mean, I know we live in a post-truth world, and the entire Democratic Party establishment here is absolutely swooning, convinced that yesterday's testimony represents a smoking gun. But an enormous amount of what she said yesterday, if this was a court of law, would be tossed out as hearsay, because despite that literal proximity to Donald Trump, she wasn't a direct witness to many of the claims that she made. And remember that the only 2 Republicans serving on this committee are dissidents. They're anti-Trumpers who have been ostracized by their own party, which officially is boycotting these proceedings, and as a result of that, is unable to cross-examine any of the witnesses that appear or any of the evidence that's put into the public domain. For example, yesterday, Liz Cheney played some pretty dramatic police radio traffic from the morning of January the 6th, in in which police were identifying members of Donald Trump's crowd that they believed were carrying weapons.
Order 1, make sure PPD knows they have an elevated threat in the trees south side of Constitution Avenue. Look for the Don't Tread on Me flag, American flag face mask, cowboy boots, weapon on the right side hip.
I got 3 men walking down the street. If the C was carrying AR-15, copy at 14th and Independence.
3 men walking down 14th Street and Independence. That's right in the centre of the city, carrying AR-15 assault rifles. Deeply alarming, obviously, if that was actually the case. But there was no opportunity for anyone to dig deeper and find out whether that was an initial report by police or something that actually happened. The testimony regarding it from Cassidy Hutchinson related to the fact that Donald Trump and the Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, knew that members of this crowd were carrying weapons and knew how dangerous they were. She testified that in the 48 hours leading up to the January 6th insurrection, she knows that Mark Meadows was told by security staff that the evidence suggested that members of the crowd would be armed. Here's what she says happened.
Mark was sitting on his couch and on his phone, which was something typical. And I remember Tony just got right into it. I was like, sorry, I just want to let you know, and had informed him, like, this is how many people we have outside the mags right now. These are the weapons that we're known to have. It's possible he listed more weapons off that I just don't recall. And gave him a brief but and concise explanation, but also fairly thorough. And I remember distinctly Mark not looking up from his phone.
Her testimony was that Mark Meadows, the Chief of Staff, really hadn't expressed any concern over the fact that members of the crowd were armed, and indeed on the day, she claims, that Donald Trump wanted security staff to stop scanning members of his crowd for weapons. He wanted metal detectors removed because so many people were not being allowed into the venue where he was going to make that inflammatory speech, and he was, of course, being Donald Trump, worried about crowd size. But again, take a careful listen to what she says here.
I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Let the people in. Take the effing mags away.
Just to be clear, Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that the president wanted to take the mags away and said that the armed individuals were not there to hurt him?
That's a fair assessment.
Devastating stuff, right? But if you go back to the beginning of that answer, it was pretty heavily caveated. I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I heard the president say something to the effect of, take the mags away. That's not exactly the same as sitting down in front of that committee and saying, I heard the president ordering the Secret Service to stop scanning members of the crowd. But it clearly has built the case that Donald Trump knew that members of this crowd were armed and knew, therefore, that they might pose a threat to police and others inside the Capitol building, including, of course, former Vice President Mike Pence, once he directed them to head up to Capitol Hill. And that seems to be the legal case that Liz Cheney particularly, and others on the committee, of course, are trying to build.
So, I mean, just to clarify a couple of things, everybody giving evidence is from the Republican side of American politics, even though the only two Republicans on the committee are, if you like, rogue. These are all people linked to Trump's administration or part of it.
Yeah, not quite the case that every single witness is a Republican, but certainly the star witnesses are absolutely Republicans who, in the case of Cassidy Hutchinson, have either broken with Donald Trump, or in the case of other figures from whom we heard last week, said that, they adhered to their oath of office rather than agreed to be invade to join what they viewed as a non-constitutional plot to overturn the outcome of the election when President Trump tried to get them to join it.
And I mean, I know what Donald Trump will say about this if he hasn't said it already. He'll say he's got no idea who she is, and also that she turned him down. He turned her down for promotion or, I don't know, romance or something like that. But
are you guessing, or have you read? You've read what? Read
no, I haven't read it, but you don't need to.
Spot on.
Yeah, of course. What's Mark Meadows said?
Mark Meadows is refusing to testify before the committee, and that is why Cassidy Hutchinson is such a tantalising witness for members of the committee, because they believe that having provided more information about conversations that she says Mark Meadows witnessed, and also her own conversations with Mark Meadows, they are putting pressure on him to testify. We also had an extraordinary moment yesterday when Michael Flynn, the former National Security Advisor, absolutely a disgraced figure in Washington, D.C., was asked on videotape whether he agreed that in the United States the Constitution calls for the peaceful transfer of power. It's a tradition of America that there should be a peaceful transfer of power. He pleaded the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination. That's like asking someone if James O'Brien is on the radio Monday to Friday 10 till 1, and then you plead the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination rather than answer the question. So, it may well be that Mark Meadows, were he eventually to be dragged before the committee, starts pleading the Fifth, which would look very bad. Do you want to get to the limousine stuff?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I do.
I mean, so again, lots of headlines being generated by these claims that were made by Cassidy Hutchinson yesterday on the witness stand. Let's take a listen to them.
The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel. And when Mr. Renato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
Now, just to be clear, she didn't witness that incident herself. Nor indeed was it personally witnessed by the man who was describing it to her. So this is hearsay based on an account from someone else who wasn't actually in the car when this allegedly happened. Late last night, the Secret Service says they have 2 agents who are willing to testify under oath that episode did not occur. They will testify to the fact that Donald Trump wanted to go to the Capitol, but we all knew that because Donald Trump told his crowd that he was going to march with them to the Capitol. We all just thought that was a lie, and he hightailed it and went back to the White House. In fact, it would seem he was prevented from going there because at the time the crowd was already getting pretty sparky up on Capitol Hill, and the Secret Service deemed it too dangerous for him to travel there. But as to whether he was sitting in the back, I mean, you're in the back even of the SUV version of the presidential limo, and I mean, a 75-year-old obese American president lunging for the steering wheel. I mean, I could barely lunge for the steering wheel from the back seat of my car. So did this actually happen? The Secret Service agents are willing to testify that it did not, and yet, in the post-truth world in which we live, it is, of course, splashed across the front pages. Donald Trump accurately last night, among the various inaccuracies that he offered about Cassidy Hutchinson, she's a phony, she's a third-rate social climber, accurately, he described her as bad news. And there's no question that for him, she was very bad news.
What about the witness tampering allegations?
Yeah, well, the witness tampering allegations are very interesting. They were injected into this at the very end of the hearing by Congresswoman Cheney, who showed a couple of messages that the committee had received from 2 witnesses whose identity, for obvious reasons, were not revealed, in which they claim they'd had a bit of a kind of a Tony Soprano approach from Trump insiders to be told, the president knows you're testifying, he knows you're loyal, he knows you're going to do the right thing. After the hearing, Democrat Jamie Raskin, who's one of the lead Democrats on the committee, told reporters they are absolutely digging into this.
Well, the evidence of witness tampering that the committee has released are the 2 episodes that the vice chair cited today anonymously for obvious reasons. It's a crime to tamper with witnesses. It's a form of obstructing justice. The committee won't tolerate it, and we haven't had the chance to fully investigate it or fully discuss it, but it's something on our agenda.
Absolutely no question that has the potential to be a big problem for the former president and people around him, because they are, as you heard there, beginning to build a possible case of obstruction of justice.
What happens next?
Well, we all go and enjoy July the 4th, James, because it's a holiday weekend here and the fireworks will dominate our attention. I think there are some questions about the timing of this hearing. It wasn't due to take place. It was hastily announced, and it's possible to imagine that the committee felt that last Friday's dramatic Supreme Court ruling on abortion had rather stolen the committee's thunder in the public mind. Suddenly the major topic of conversation on everybody's lips shifted, so I think they wanted people to head into the July 4th weekend with a bit more meat to talk about with regard to Donald Trump. These hearings are going to stretch on until September. It seems pretty clear that the committee is trying to build the case for the Department of Justice to take action against Donald Trump personally and members of his inner circle. But look, I would point out that the clock here is ticking. We've got a date with midterm elections in November. If the Republicans, as currently looks likely, triumph in those midterm elections, the work of this committee next January comes to a crashing halt. It is not axiomatic that the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, is going to agree to take legal action against Donald Trump, because that obviously would be a politically seismic step to take in the middle of midterm elections here in the United States. And I would simply point out that in Colorado last night, hours after this hearing ended, one of Donald Trump's most loyal supporters in Congress, Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, the woman who insists on carrying a pistol wherever she goes, even in Washington, D.C., was easily re-elected in an election race there, beat off a primary challenge from a more moderate Republican. So, Donald Trump is definitely in more dangerous waters than he was before these hearings began, substantially more dangerous in terms of possible criminal liability. But this story isn't over until it's over, and the committee's still got a long way to go.
Who would be, final question, possible witnesses who really would change the game, ones that might turn up and not plead the fifth?
Yeah, I mean, I think she definitely changed the game yesterday, and we don't know what else the committee has up its sleeve.
I should stress that a lot of her testimony was first-hand experience. We focused on the biggest smoking guns, which were closer to hearsay, but a lot of her testimony was first-person experience,
and was damaging, particularly in terms of that early testimony about this knowledge that Trump had that his crowd had weapons. I mean, she absolutely established that. The committee definitely now wants to hear from the former White House counsel, the top legal official at the White House, Pat Cipollone, because there was evidence yesterday that he was deeply alarmed about what Donald Trump's plans were on January the 6th and was advising Mark Meadows and others in the White House that they needed to lawyer up because they were going to face potentially some extremely serious criminal charges after the events of January the 6th. That inside the White House, the president's daughter, Ivanka, was among officials who persuaded him to put out a video message the day after finally conceding the election, saying that his supporters had defiled democracy in America because they were worried that Mike Pompeo and others in the cabinet were talking about invoking the 25th Amendment and ousting Donald Trump from power. Now, again, Ms. Hutchinson had no first-hand knowledge of those cabinet conversations, but the idea that that video was made basically under pressure from Trump insiders who worried about the path that they suddenly found themselves on 15 days before his presidency came to an end is definitely something the committee is going to want to dig into.
And last bit, I promise. Melania Trump's former PR person, revealing a little text exchange, which is pretty grim as well, isn't it?
It is pretty grim, yeah. Stephanie Grisham, also a pretty discredited character here, it has to be said, sent a text
But there's no suggestion that the text exchange isn't real.
No suggestion at all. Highly likely, no indication that it's not a real text from Stephanie Grisham to her boss at the time, First Lady Melania Trump. Actually, I think by that point, Grisham may have been Director of Communications at the White House. She had so many hats, it was hard to follow. But she clearly texted Melania Trump to say, do you want to put a statement out on Twitter saying peaceful demonstration is fine, but violent demonstration is absolutely not, and we need to uphold the traditions of the country, to which the one-word answer from Melania Trump came back, no. So that put paid to that.
Indeed it did. Simon Marks, as ever, absolutely sparkling, cramming so much into the available space, for which we are incredibly grateful. Simon Marks, of course, LBC's Washington editor there, bringing you up to date with developments at these remarkable and continuing hearings in America. Raging Trump had to be stopped from joining Capitol riot is a headline that the Times newspaper in this country chooses, and significantly without any quotes anywhere in that headline. The stuff that has been established, and as Simon steered us through, stuff that has been alleged but not necessarily established. 12:51 is the time. 12:54 is the time. Theo Washwood is back once again like a renegade master.
To remind you of what Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, told you last night during the State of London debate, when you pressed him, James, on whether he thinks a Labour government should bring the UK back into the European Union single market.
You referred to the single market in the context of Northern Ireland. Should the Labour Party at a national level be agitating for rejoining the single market?
I don't speak for the National Labour Party.
So you're not short of opinion.
But I believe we should. Spot on. Worse, that's the biggest. The biggest piece of self-inflicted harm ever done to a country, leaving the European Union.
Sound like that. You sound like that loudmouth on the radio. I wasn't expecting that. That was appalling journalism by me, because I dived in for kind of, oh, come on, answer the question, why are you evading? And he wasn't evading at all. I was just expecting him to evade, but he didn't evade, and he did absolutely go all in.
Puts him in the same group as Anne McMorrin, who's a Labour frontbencher, who was rebuked by Keir Starmer's team for suggesting the same thing.
And Tobias Ellwood, a former Conservative minister, rebuked by his party for suggesting the same thing.
Downing Street were quite pleased with that, because it felt like it circled the wagons against the rebels who were plotting to get rid of the Prime Minister. Keir Starmer's now responded. He was asked by one of our colleagues about what he thought of Sadiq Khan's idea.
There's no case for returning to the EU or to the single market. But there's no point pretending that the deal that the government's negotiated is working, because it obviously isn't working. You can see the queues at ports across the country. You can see the problems in Northern Ireland. And all the government ever did was shout the slogan, "Get Brexit done." A responsible government, a Labour government, the next government will make Brexit work, and that's what I'm absolutely focused on. So there's no case for return, but there is absolutely a case for making Brexit work, rather than just a slogan which isn't helping anyone.
But make Brexit work is just a slogan that isn't helping anyone.
This is the really interesting thing about Keir Starmer's stance, and Lord Darling, Alistair Darling, the former Chancellor, was putting this idea forward last week on LBC, is that actually what Labour wants to do is it wants to try and renegotiate the trade deal. And the trade deal is actually the best thing, comparatively, doesn't compare to what we had when we were in the European Union in terms of access to the European Union, but actually it's tariff-free, it's not frictionless, and it's impossible to rejoin. The European Union said this. It's impossible to get any improvements on the trade deal in terms of making trade more frictionless, but without joining the single market, because the European Union wants to ensure that the single market, its integrity is preserved in terms of standards and regulations.
Here's the thing, and I like to think I may have established a degree of authority on matters Brexit related over the last few years.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, honourable lady. The withdrawal agreement is the best available Brexit, if you're not going to be in the single market or the customs union.
Yes.
Once Theresa May's red lines had been established, and once the Good Friday Agreement had been understood, the withdrawal agreement is as good as it gets.
Yes, if you were to take the two provisos that the Good Friday Agreement has to be preserved and the integrity of the single market has to be preserved from the European Union's point of view.
I mean, it's no consolation to those of us who've been explaining this since 2017, but it is the best available solution to the problem.
What Conservative backbenchers would like to do, and what indeed Boris Johnson would like to do, is to do something the European Union says compromises the integrity of the single market by taking away the need for stringent checks on goods travelling from mainland Great Britain into Northern Ireland.
They've already said, the Italian gentleman whose name temporarily eludes me has already reiterated once again that just ain't ever going to happen.
No, but this is what Keir Starmer is setting up for in terms of the Make Brexit Work, is just put Northern Ireland to one side for the moment. He's talking about the queues, and the queues we see mainly at Dover, going into Calais and straight into the European Union. The only way you can deal with those queues by taking away the checks that already exist is to rejoin the single market. So it's a slightly incomprehensible line from Keir Starmer. As you say, it's a slogan: "Make Brexit work." But it can't work any better. It can't work any better than it's currently working unless you join the single market.
And just an interesting private eyes out today. Carrie's people called Rebecca's people is the true detail apparently of that story about what the Prime Minister and his wife really feared might emerge. So I shall be buying that on the way home today without any shadow of a doubt. It's coming up to 1 o'clock. You've been listening to the James and Theo Show on LBC. Time now for Sheila Fogarty. 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 LBC. Time now for Sheila Fogarty.